Welcome along, everyone. It's World Oceans Day today, so I thought I'd do a special quick recording to look at some of my underwater photos. I haven't had a chance to process any new pictures since getting back from Mexico, so I thought for a change I'd dive into the portfolio on my website and talk through some of the images on there. There's 100 images in this portfolio, and I'm only going to sort of probably go through 50 today. Go through relatively quickly. And also I'd sort of always sort of temper this sort of selection by saying that as a photographer, your portfolio is there to do several things for you. Of course, it's there to show off your strongest work, the work you think is most likely to impress people. But it's also there to tell other stories about what you do as a photographer. So I've always wanted my portfolio not just to impress other photographers, but also to impress potential clients of my photos, to show the diversity of work I can do, which maybe might lead to interesting commissions and that sort of thing. So it's quite a varied portfolio, this. Anyway, if I click on this picture here, we should get started. So this is the first picture in the portfolio. It's a relatively recent picture taken in 2018 or 2019, I don't remember which, shot with a D850 and a fisheye lens, a sunset split in the Red Sea. We typically always do the sunset splits during my Red Sea workshops, but on this particular day we had very unusual weather, which forced us to go to a place that normally wouldn't be calm and protected and good for sunset splits, because our normal places are didn't quite have the weather to get the shots. And actually, as a result, I think I like this picture because it's different. I think if because I teach this on the workshop, the pictures of the standard places have become very well known, and as a result don't feel as special anymore. So this one for me, I show it because it's a little bit different from what we normally get on the workshops. I don't think it's any better. I think actually both Ras Kati, where we normally do it, and Rasam Sid actually offer better opportunities than this particular location. But I use this one in my portfolio because it's a nice photo, but also it's a little bit different because we just happen to have unusual weather that got us to a different place. The palm trees in this are part of a hotel. There aren't palm trees normally in Egypt where I took this picture. They've been planted by the hotel, but they also, I quite like them. But they are, of course, not natural. Well, they're living palm trees, but they've been planted by someone like a garden. Right. Next up, a real favourite picture of mine, taken a long time ago, I think 2006, 2007, in South Australia, diving at Wall Bay. And this fantastic creature is a Leafy Sea Dragon. And I was really keen to get a portrait of one and hadn't really thought very much about the type of picture I wanted. But I really liked this image. It really defined or really represented my style at the time. I remember I was diving with my friend Shannon Conway on this trip, and he was a very classic macro photographer, all about composition and black backgrounds and strong graphic elements. And we both shot macro portraits of the Leafy Sea Dragons on this shot, and his shots were very geometric, very precisely composed, black backgrounds, high impact. And my shot was much more about character, about connection with the subject, about a naturalistic field with the green background, And I really like this picture and continue to like it to this day. It's amazing how some pictures live such a long time. This picture here is the Kittiwake wreck. This picture was a picture that I got partly by accident. A friend of mine had been taking pictures of divers standing, my friend Damia had been taking pictures of divers standing, looking up at shipwrecks on a recent trip, and I decided to take this picture to tease him. And I asked the my dive guide who I was diving with to stand on the seabed and look up at the wreck, and just to make a fun shot. And then as we were in the middle of doing this fun comedy shot, this amazing school of jacks swam into frame, and so suddenly my fun comedy shot became a really great opportunity. And I'm very happy that I was able to get these shots. But the fact the diver was standing was planned, but not planned for this shot. So I'd much rather the diver was swimming for this photo, but they were standing, so that's it. Next picture is a classic view of Silfra in Iceland. This picture is kind of the best view, I think, of Silfra It's the cathedral. It's the last part of the Sulphur Canyon, and this is a photo taken in the middle of the day when the sun shines right up this canyon and illuminates both walls of the canyon and allows you to create this very colourful, very detailed picture. I had never seen anyone else shoot this exact angle before I took this picture, and I know my friend Byron, who runs a lot of the diving up there, says everybody well, since I took this picture more than 10 years ago, everyone ever since has been turning up in Iceland as photographers wanting to have this exact view. And it's very easy for him because the rocks in the foreground actually make it very easy to position the customer with the camera, and also it's very easy for the model because they just there's nice things to line up against. So it's a very easy picture to reproduce, certainly in terms of composition. The challenge of shooting in Sulphur is that Sulphur is really dark. It doesn't look it in this picture, but this picture I took, I think, on the first trip with the Nikon D5, and it was one of those shots that, no, maybe D4, it was that long, it must have been D4, and it was one of those photos that really made use of the new high ISO capability of cameras that were sort of turning up 10, 12 years ago. And I'm really happy that I was able to get a shot like this that not only had this composition and that I'd made the most of the light and we'd planned the dive to get the light right, but actually I've been able to get a photo that's really sharp right into the corners of the frame, which is obviously one of the problems you have if you have to open the aperture because of lack of light, and also because the camera was good at high ISO. It's got a fantastic image quality even when printed really huge, and this picture has been printed a great deal, sold a great deal. It's even been on Iceland national stamps, so it's a much loved picture of mine. Diving back all the way to 2004 now, where I took this picture of a Boha Snapper, and this picture was awarded as the winner of the Animal Portraits category of the Wildlife Photographer of the Year in 2005. I didn't enter it in the 2004 competition because it was right at the point where the Wildlife Photographer of the Year was transitioning from film into digital, and this is a digital picture. And in some of the early years of them accepting digital images, I was worried, actually. I didn't want to waste a good digital shot in case the competition was very biased against one format or the other. But actually, as it turned out in 2004, Doug Perrine was the overall winner of the Wildlife Photographer of the Year that year, and the second time that it had ever been won overall by an underwater photo. And it was a digital photo too, so that proved to me from then onwards it was well worth entering digital pictures, and there wasn't going to be any bias against them as long as you played by the rules. And so I entered this picture the next year and was very, very excited that it won the category. Many people said at the time it was by far the standout image of that year's competition, and many people were kind enough to say to me that they thought it should have been the picture that was awarded the overall winner. And I have to say that it certainly lived longer in the history of the competition. It still gets shown and reproduced in various collection books, more so than the overall winner from that year. But it would have been, yes, but I think it was one of those you don't get to be a category winner that often in the wildlife photographer, and when you do, you always hope you get that stroke of luck. That means your category winner becomes the overall winner. So in some ways I was a little bit unlucky, but I also think at that stage of my career, I probably wouldn't have been ready to make the most of being the overall winner. And certainly I've enjoyed trying to get further success in the competition down the years. Most people, when they become overall winner of the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, have to retire. So I think in many ways it was a good thing that I didn't pick up that prize that year, because I've enjoyed entering so much down the years. This is another Wildlife Photographer of the Year picture. This picture was a runner-up in the birds category of Wildlife Photographer of the Year. I always like to see my underwater pictures not just compete against underwater pictures, but to compete against all nature pictures. And so I entered this picture in the birds category, and the judges at the awards dinner told me that it was very close. It was a split decision between this and the eventual category winner, and ultimately they favoured the other one. So this was a near category winner, but it was actually runner up in the category. Taken in California, diving the oil rigs there, which had these big schools of chub mackerel underneath them when we were there, and the cormorants and the sea lions were really enjoying hunting them. And I took this photo of the cormorant. This was taken with a special Ivanov corrector lens to take this picture and produce really nice image quality that I'd adapted from a Hasselblad housing. It was designed by Carl Zeiss I think in the 70s or 80s, for Hasselblad housings, medium format housings, and I adapted it to work on my housing. And I still have it, and I really like the lens, but it's very hard to justify the weight of it when you're packing for a trip and you've got a WACP that kind of does the same job, but with a zoom as well. So for now, it's a little bit semi-retired, which is a bit of a pity, but at least it's had a wildlife photographer win to its credit. Into the realms of macro now, and this is a Philippines picture taken in Anilao on a dive there, showing a little ghost goby hiding amongst the layers in this sea pen, growing up out of the seabed. Just a nice, simple but graphic image. A real crowd pleaser, not a particularly difficult photo to take, although actually getting all this lined up and done properly is a little bit challenging. And you obviously have to have the luck that the goby is living there. But once it is, I think it's quite an easy picture to take. I think the only thing that perhaps is good in terms of my thinking when I took this picture is that I gave the subject space to breathe. And that's something that it probably shares with this previous picture. It would have been very easy with the Cormorant to have really zoomed in on that action and just had, the Cormorant nice and big. And I realised that I could, tell this bigger picture by not stuffing the frame with the subject and having a relatively small subject in the picture. With the Ghost Goby, I did take frames on tighter compositions than this, but I thought this was the most interesting composition with this lovely repeating pattern of the sea pen. I think it's one of the challenges as an underwater photographer. You have it drilled into your head that filling the frame and getting close is good, and it makes it quite a challenge to be able to create images that the main subject is relatively small in the frame. And I think whenever we do, they create powerful images. This picture's in my portfolio. Just it's a fun picture, and it's far from perfect. It was posed, but not posed with models, posed with a workshop group, and it was just a bit of fun to take this picture. You can see the fact that everyone is kind of wearing different stuff and having different things, but I like the naturalness of it, and I like the picture very much. It is a picture that, given the opportunity, I would definitely redo with all models and everyone wearing, pictures, clothes that work together and work the opportunity to get the jump into the water absolutely perfect from everyone. But at the same time, there's a naturalness to this picture I really like. I think what I would say the reason why I put it in my portfolio, despite those sort of various flaws, is I think it's a very nice lifestyle, fun people picture. And although I'm probably best known for underwater wildlife photography, I think this picture's in my portfolio to remind people that I do more than that. And it's also why we've already had a rec as well, to show people that it's not just about wildlife photography underwater. I tend to photograph everything. Although wildlife is really where my heart is, and that's where this picture comes from. This is another picture awarded in the wildlife photographer in the black and white category. This picture actually formed part of the exhibition that was shown at 10 Downing Street, which is where the Prime Ministers of the UK live. And we got to go there and talk about the pictures to various bigwigs. And it was pretty cool to go there, and actually made it more special because David Dublier won the underwater category this particular year in the wildlife photographer. And so it was really great to have the chance to go there, especially with one of my photography heroes. That kind of made the day even more special. These are big eye jacks, and they are gathered in a school, and they were spawning at this time, so they were kind of breaking off into pairs, and I think these were the ones that were left behind still looking for mates before they sort of split off into their pairs. When they paired up for spawning, they swim for several days, with the male, which is black, swimming underneath the female, which stays silver, and they just stay in their pairs for a long time. And these were the ones that were kind of waiting to pair up, and they just happened to form this circle in front of a few of us during a workshop trip, and I was able to get this picture. This is a Spanish shawl nudibranch, one of the few nudibranchs that has a common name. It's a flabellina, purple flabellina nudibranch. It's a characteristic species of California in particular. It's kind of one of the macro must-haves when you dive the kelp forests. And this picture here was taken on a coastal dive in, I can't remember the name. Is it Palos Verdes? Area near to just a coastal area a little bit north of Long Beach Harbour, and that area. Yeah, just a really beautiful subject, lit with a snoot, just to create a clean image in what was actually quite a murky, dirty dive, but a beautiful creature living there nonetheless. This picture here is a basking shark taken in Cornwall in the UK. This picture is a composite image taken with St Michael's Mount. Now, although this is a composite image, both halves of this image were taken on the same day in the same area, and I was actually sharing the boat with wildlife photographer Doug Perrine, who was over in the UK to judge the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition the year after he had been the overall winner, or no, a few years after actually, because this was taken around 2010, I think. So yeah, so he won overall in 2004, so quite a long time after. But he came over to judge, and and then he stayed on a week and did basking sharks. Back then the competition didn't take quite so long, so it was judged in June, whereas nowadays it's judged in March, April time. But it's still announced at the same time. They just take longer over it these days, more entries and that sort of thing. Anyway, I was sharing the boat with Doug, and Doug always said that he would always vouch for me with this image, that it accurately represented what we were seeing in the day, even though it was a composite image. So it's not a misleading composite, but it is a composite image taken with my huge dome port, 55 centimeter dome port. You have to use about 4 or 5 kilos of lead just to get it to sink to the halfway point of the dome port, but it allowed me to create this split level image in open sea. Right. Back to California, and now out to the Channel Islands in California and the wonderful kelp forests of Santa Barbara Island. This picture was taken at the end of a dive. We had some very nice visibility. I only had a couple of days shooting there, but we just had such lovely conditions. It was a very, very productive trip. And I think this picture was taken when I was completely out of air at the end of one of the dives, shooting sea lions, shooting this sea lion, who momentarily kind of perched in this kelp forest as if it was a bed. I think there was a better opportunity, I think if this sea lion had hung around, I think I could have created a really beautiful, or a really better composition than this. I think this picture here, the sea lion's a little bit in the middle of the frame, I think the frame as a whole is not as well balanced as it could be. But this was a very fleeting opportunity. I got one frame, and the next frame is the sea lion whizzing off away. It was, it's always remained a pleasing picture for me. Okay, on to the next shot. I think I'm only going to do 20 pictures because this is only the 13th image I've shown you out of the 100. So I think we'll be revisiting this topic a few times in the coming weeks. I'll do 20. I guess there'll be 5 installments, so this is part 1 of 5. Now to Mexico and freshwater cenotes picture. This picture here is taken at the Garden of Eden cenote. Actually, this part may not be called the Garden of Eden, but you go in through the Garden of Eden cenote. You go through a relatively short swim through, and you come out into this area, which in the afternoon has some really beautiful light. It's usually a pretty quiet cenote as well, so you don't have loads of people in the way, and it allows you to produce, to get some really nice images. But we went there specifically in the afternoon to try and get these sunbeams, and we had to wait quite a while clouds passed and things, but once the sunbeams were there, they were very easy to shoot. To create a picture like this, taken with a high ISO and a long exposure. People always look at pictures of sunbeams and go, oh, you must have used a fast shutter speed. But no, if it's dark, you need to use a slow shutter speed. The key thing is your composition, to make sure that the beams are the brightest thing in the composition, and that allows you to expose for the beams, and then the beams show up beautifully like this. And this is Cesar, who was my dive guide on that trip, modelling for me in this picture with his excellent buoyancy, allowing me to use that slow exposure. Right, next shot is a very different image, and I think again, because it's a portfolio, I'm trying to show some diversity in my work, and to show that my work represents lots of different styles of photography. And this picture here is a completely out of focus image of a sea fan taken in Fiji, and this was taken with a Trioplan lens, and I purposely defocused the lens on the sea fan and was trying to create this very artistic, very painterly effect on the sea fan. I would imagine it's a love it or hate it type image for some of you. I really like it. I wouldn't put it as like, you know, absolute top 10 picture I've ever taken, of course, but I really like it, and I really like what it says about my photography. It shows that my photography is not just simply one style of image, but I allow my photographic interest to pull the visual variety of my portfolio into lots of different directions. A well-known spin shot of mine. This picture won the underwater category of the Oasis Nature Competition, which is a big Italian nature competition. I actually only entered that competition because they were asking me to judge it, and I wasn't available to judge it, and I was feeling guilty. So I said, I'm not going to judge your competition this year. I'm sorry, I'm too busy, but I will enter it at least. And I was fortunate, having said that, that my picture won the underwater category that year. I then went and I was able to judge it the following year. This picture is a long exposure photo with intentional camera movement, rotating the camera in a circular fashion to create this spin effect, and then using inward lighting to illuminate the sponge and freeze it in the image. The need to use inward lighting is really driven by the fact that this subject has got background right behind it, and to freeze the subject and not freeze the background, the strobes need to be aimed at the subject and not the background, and that's where inward lighting comes in. There's a good explanation on this technique, in fact, using these pictures as an example in my book, Underwater Photography Masterclass, if anyone wants to dive into it a bit further. It's also something that we cover in that Cayman workshop, because I think learning to create these shots, particularly with sponges using inward lighting, I think is a great challenge for aspiring underwater photographers, because they really need to understand lots of things. You need to understand exactly how to control your strobes. You need to understand, you know, how to control your lighting, because it's not just a case of using a long exposure. You often need to adjust your ISO and your aperture so that that long exposure gives you the correct exposure. And I think the mistake a lot of people make with these spin shots is they massively overexpose the background in order to use the long exposure. And I think one of the challenges of this shot is to realize that the need to have a long exposure impacts all the other aspects of your camera settings, and you really need to know what you're doing to create an image like this, certainly during a workshop. And I like that aspect of this picture. It teaches people not only how to do this technique, but lots more about their photography. The wonderful Red Sea. This is a very vibrant reef scene. This is the corner of Yolanda Reef in Ras Mohammed National Park at the tip of Sinai. And this particular day, I'm sure the current was churning on my back when I took this picture, and the antheas were all out dancing, and this picture is perfectly timed to when they're all out feeding on the plankton. And I just love the vibrancy of life in this image, with so much, you know, so many fish all doing their thing, and all doing their thing so neatly as well, which is I think creates a really eye-catching image. The water wasn't the clearest on this day. You can see it hasn't got the world's greatest watercolour, this picture, but the fish and the reef are lovely. These are obviously antheus fish, scalefin antheus. There's a few males, but mainly females in this picture. I'm not the most dedicated big animal photographer of all the underwater photographers out there. I challenge myself to create all sorts of different underwater images, but I was keen in my portfolio, obviously, to show that I do shoot big animals. And if you're going to try and find a famous big animal from the ocean, the great white shark is a pretty good place to start. So it made sense to drop one of these into the top 20 of my portfolio to make sure I've got them. I like this picture. I think it's got a lot of character to it. The shark seems to be grinning a little bit. It was quite a fun shot to take this, because I was head and shoulders outside the cage taking this picture, and the shark I was shot with the fisheye lens, so the shark's quite close, and it's coming towards me, so I was backing up into the cage as I was shooting this picture. And just after taking this picture, I caught my mask strap, when it's kind of one of those big neoprene ones, on the top part of the window of the cage. So as I pulled my head back inside the cage after taking this picture with the great white shark racing towards me, I managed to knock my face mask off my face. So moments after taking this picture, everything was a blur. And it was quite an interesting moment, losing your face mask when moments before you were just watching a great white shark charging towards you. Of course, the shark turned away. It wasn't charging towards me. It was charging towards a piece of tuna, and it went off following the tuna. But just for a moment or two, I was quite, wondering what was going to happen when I got my sight back. Right, on to this image. What number are we on to now? I'll just go back and check where we are. So the great white shark 17. This is number 18. This is another older image of mine taken in Lembe Strait. I think this picture has been by far my best-selling image ever taken in Lembe, and I always put this up at the beginning of my Lembe workshops and say to people, I know you're all here for pygmy seahorses and hairy frogfish and mimic octopus, but actually the picture of mine that sells best from Lembe is this one of an anemone fish over some very pretty tentacles. And I think it's a reminder that, great underwater photos, whether you want them to sell, whether you want them to do well in competitions, and certainly true in Lembe, you don't need to be so subject obsessed. Actually, it's about great photos, not about great subjects. This image here is a Harbour Seal, taken again on that very brief trip to California that I made. I was really, really keen to see a Harbour Seal, but it's not so reliable, especially when you've only got a couple of days of diving to do it. So I was really pleased that Peter Rowlands and I met this friendly individual. It didn't stay with us for particularly long, five minutes or so, but I was able to get some nice images of it. I was actually set up for inward lighting before we bumped into the Harbour Seal or common seal, and as a result all my photos of it are taken with inward lighting, which I think works really well because it really lights the seal up and then leaves the background really, really dark and just completely ambient lighty. But it wasn't planned for the seal. It was more I was shooting that lighting style on Garibaldi's and other subjects before the seal came along, and then when the seal came along I didn't really have much time to change. I was busy getting the shots. But I think as a result it worked particularly well. It really makes the whiskers stand out fantastically well, which works really well on this picture. I think you can actually see the effect of the inward lighting on the on the subject because of this shadowy area on the forehead of the seal here in the middle. Okay, on to our next picture, which is our final one from this, and it's another wreck shot, again trying to show within my portfolio the diversity of styles and subjects. This is a picture taken on one of my favourite wrecks, the Thistlegorm, a picture that sadly you can't take anymore because this steering wheel has been stolen from the wreck since I took this picture. Relatively recent theft. It was one of the last remaining steering wheels, but eventually got stolen by someone thinking that an old plastic steering wheel will be a good souvenir. Quite why, but there you go. And these are in Bedford OYC tanker lorries. There's 5 of them on the Thistlegorm, and this is a photo taken from inside the cab of one of these lorries, photographing through to the cab of the second lorry, and my off-camera strobe was in the cab of the second lorry, so all the light is coming from that off-camera strobe. And I just really like this composition, these frames within the frame, the fortuitously placed soldierfish around the picture, and I think the steering wheel creates a great focal point for the image, which is why this picture you can't do anymore, because you without that steering wheel I think the picture really lacks a focal point, sadly. You can still obviously go there and take the same shot, the trucks haven't moved, but the steering wheel, the lack of that focal point stops the picture working. Okay, I think that's where I'm going to stop on this talk. Hopefully you enjoyed it. That's the first 20 images of my portfolio on my website, and I'll pop back and do some more of these in the future. But for now, happy World Oceans Day.